Hello everyone, welcome to the Railway Civil Engineers Association. Welcome to another online talk. Tonight we've got a talk on a slightly different theme, military railway engineering, the role of the Army in the railways. And did you know that there was a unit of the Army that specialised in railway engineering? So Major Alex Hamilton, officer commanding 507 unit from British Army, is going to be giving us a talk on that. And Alex is also route infrastructure engineer for buildings and civils on Network Rail, Eastern Region and Anglia, I think, is that right?
Anglia and Eastern.
Anglia and Eastern, yes, Anglia first. We've got something, something that I think a lot of us probably don't know very much about, including myself. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. Next month, we have an event. And it's going to be a first because it's going to be our first live in-person event at the RCEA since COVID. So as you probably know, in the past, a lot of our events were at the RCEA in 1 Great George Street. We've transitioned to online, which has been great because lots of people can attend where they might not have been able to make it. And we'll be doing both. But it would be fantastic for any of you who would like to get along to the Institution of Civil Engineers in 1 Great George Street, London. I think you all know the address, SW1P3AA. Book it online because obviously, like all things, it'll be limited numbers. So it'll be, I think, up to 70 at the event. So go on the IC website and you've got an option. You can book online if you want to attend online and you get the usual Teams invite or whatever technology they use. Or you can attend in person. And if you can come along, that will be great. We won't have the ICE bar this time, but I think a few of us will probably retire to the Westminster Arms around the corner. So if anybody wants to join for a little bit of socialising afterwards, that will be very welcome. So do come along. Fantastic talk, Luton Airport Rail Link. What could be better? That's a good railway project doing some good and creating better connectivity and transport. So Volker Fitzpatrick and some of their partners will be coming along to talk to us about that. So that's 25th of November, 6 p.m, slightly later start time to allow you time to get there in person. And really, the more the merrier. So if you're interested in coming along line and seeing what the IC looks like again, do book your place. After that, in December, we'll be looking to have a bit of a Christmas event. We're just sorting out the details of it now, but what we'd like to do is, it's 100 years since the RCEA was founded, the Railway Civil Engineers Association, in 1921. Obviously, 2021's been a bit of a funny year, but we want to just have a bit of a social and a celebration. And what we'd quite like to do is to try and informally share a few members' recollections of things they remember from the industry, how it was, how it is now, how they came into the industry, because we've all come from different backgrounds, really. So what we'd like to do is a bit of a sort of a informal chat session where we maybe ask people if you want to just stand up and say a few things about something you remember, or if you've got any really interesting pictures or images of things that happened in the past, how, I don't know, how bridges were built in the past, what safety standards were like. Don't limit yourself to that, but anything that you'd like to share, any photos or images. So if you're interested in that and up for coming along, please drop us an email at rce@ice.org.uk and we'll collate those, and we'll just try and run a bit of a friendly social where we can have a bit of a chat and some networking and whatever afterwards. And there'll be some wine and mince pies and other drinks as well. So that's obviously that's open to all RCEA members. It's free to RCEA members. So we'll be sending out all the details shortly. So look out for an email from us and we'll put them on our website, rcea.org.uk. So do look forward to that. It'd be really nice to see as many of you as possible up at the IC in Great George Street and just have a bit of a social, really. Watch this space and we'll send some details out on that. As usual, I'm just going to talk through just a few PWI, Permanent Way Institute meetings of interest for us. This is from their most recent schedule. So really have a look on their website and it's thepwi.org and you'll find their events list, and there's lots of online free. They're a big organisation, so they do a lot of meetings. So I've not got them all here, but these are a few of the key ones coming up in November. So if there's anything that interests you there, they're online, free and available to attend. And as usual, the plug for membership, you'll get all the details of our events earlier, any special events and when we can do them, site visits. and of course the Christmas event. So it's £18.50 for the year for full members, £8.75 for young professionals, £5.50 for retired, and free for students. So if you scan that QR code, I think it takes you to a form and you can apply for membership. So we exist because we're interested in railway civil engineering, because that's largely what we do. So we're here at sort of, the bit of the RCEA to arrange talks and events on that. And so that's what we're doing tonight. So we've got a great talk ahead. So I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Major Alex Hamilton and allow him to deliver his talk. As always, there'll be a chance for question and answers afterwards. If you can drop your questions and answers in the Q&A pane. So if you see the little symbol at the top of your screen with a question mark in, put your questions in there and we'll endeavour to feed them to Major Alex after the talk. Okay, so I'll hand over to you now. So Major Alex, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just a quick introduction. Major Alex Hamilton, Officer Commanding of 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers, also Route Infrastructure Engineer for Buildings and Civils on Anglia and East Mids in Eastern Region Network Rail. And my railway journey and indeed military journey have gone hand in glove for the past 23 years. I started out in the Territorial Army back in 1998, joining the last of the railway operating squadrons. 275 Railway Squadron, learning how to be a driver shunter, and that was at the same time I was at university learning my trade as a civil engineer in the very early days. So it's continued all the way through, and 23 years later I find myself as the Officer Commanding of 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers, the Army's sole railway capability in 2021. So tonight is very much about military railway engineering, but first we need to give you an idea about what military engineering is about and how we split it down. We've got a core mantra within the Royal Engineers, which is live, move and fight. Live is about housing the Army in the field, giving it accommodation and quartering, be that protected or normal under canvas accommodation. Move is about being able to move the Army to all reaches of the continent and also within that particular war zone, and that could be bridges, rail, road, air, any transportation system to actually get you there. And the last piece is fight, and enabling the British Army to do its job on the front line, breaching obstacles, forming gaps and allowing the teeth arms to do their business. On operations, the Royal Engineers covers mobility and counter mobility and also survivability. And when we're talking about this, mobility is enabling the Army to move. If you consider 80-ton main battle tanks, they need to be able to get somewhere on heavy equipment transporters. Counter mobility is about preventing the enemy's tanks moving about in your battle space. And survivability is engineering a solution that will enable your troops to survive, be that entrenchments, obstacles or other such like force protection measure. The Royal Engineers have a very long and proud history. It's been going since 1716, although its roots go far back as the Bishop Gundulph back in the Norman Conquest period. I'm not going to go into the history of the Corps. It's very large subject in its own right, and I commend you to listen to the historical chats of the Royal Engineer Historical Society if you've got a passing interest. However, we will go into the railway aspect. In the Royal Engineers, we have a number of types of units. Majority of them are combat engineer units, focusing on that enabling up in the front line. We have the armoured engineer capability that uses armoured vehicles fitted out with specialist equipment. We also have a lot of artisans and tradesmen specialising in brickwork, repair, plumbing, electrical, and also plant operating. So all sappers within the Royal Engineers are multifaceted within their trade group. We also have some other specialist groups such as the geo trade, which is about mapping and interpretation of the ground, the chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear warfare, detection and testing capability, and we also have the traditional explosive ordnance disposal and search capability within the Corps. The part of the Corps where 507 Specialist Team lives is in the Professional Engineer Wing, and that is housed within 170 Engineer Group based at Chilwell, and it is a hybrid of both regular and reserve soldiers. We are an infrastructure consultancy to defence and also other government departments. We work in the construction sector, both with civilian contractors and military tradesmen from across the Corps. And our roles and capabilities are as a professional consultancy. Just think of us as the Green Atkins, project management, engineering design, contract management and facilities management. And we cover a vast spectrum of disciplines. This is the format of 170 Engineer Group. The lime green indicates regular subunits, whilst the yellow indicates reserve subunits. And within the basic building block of 170 is the Specialist Team Royal Engineers, which is a grouping of 30 to 50 soldiers, all professionally qualified or experienced tradespeople, and they're clumped together under works groups. So, for example, 20 works group focuses explicitly on air support, airfield damage repair, and also the systems that you can find in any of the airfields across the world. 6.2 and 6.3 works group focus on general works. 6.6 works group focuses on specialist areas such as force protection engineering, bulk petroleum, water and power. And 6.5 works groups, where 507 STRE reside, focuses on fuel infrastructure, power, water, ports and general works. And the idea of 6.5, it's a heavy works group. It focuses on heavy civilian industry and infrastructure, and that's where we primarily recruit our soldiers from. So the building block of 170 is the Specialist Team Royal Engineers. As we've already described, they're normally multidiscipline. They are 37 to 51 soldiers in strength, and they have a complete mix of skill range, ranging from professionally qualified engineers at chartered, incorporated and Eng Tech status, all the way through to support trades. And they cater for complex infrastructure tasks. Most specialist teams have a specific role, such as bulk petroleum or power, or some of them are general works. And when we mobilise to do a job, more than one STRE may be involved. So, for example, if you are going to be working in a facility with both power and fuel, you would mobilise the power and fuel teams to actually do the job with. When we come to the theatre element, when we go to war, we operate under the Joint Force Engineer, and that is the head engineer for that campaign, and the STREs fulfil the function of the Military Design Authority. The Military Construction Force, or MCF, is actually provided by the normal engineer regiments, providing their sappers, and the Military Design Authority, STREs, control the work and the designs that are actually delivering. So that is the basic building block. So that's just to give you some context of where 507 sits. Moving on to railways and their role in defence. Within the British Army, railways are used as long-haul capability to move bulk equipment, material and manpower from the United Kingdom to wherever it is required in theatre. Majority of it will be civilian railway network being used to move the army. And when we come into the last 200 miles, we start coming into the corps or divisional area where the armies are actually operating. This is where the military capability is required. That last 200 miles is where the significant threats of what the enemy forces are going to throw at it are going to be impacting on the railway network. So, for example, this could be aerial interdiction, long-range artillery fires, special forces, chemical warfare, or even cyber attack afflicting that part of the railway network. Within that corps or divisional area, that you will find Royal Engineer or NATO railway troops specialised in infrastructure repair, and you will also find NATO railway operating troops as well to actually run the network. Further use of rail, and you can see some examples of its flexibility and capability. Each train that we're running in the United Kingdom, for example, can take 22 to 26 armoured vehicles in one hit, taking a significant amount of HGVs off the road. You can see some of our out-of-gauge load movements that we carry out on the continent to move the main battle tanks around, and also a large, less exciting part of rail traffic for defence is the movement of bulk ammunition and material. Not as exciting as tank movements, but it is the bread and butter of what is moving around on the network at the moment. So that's the defence's need for the use of rail in war. We'll now move on to 507. Who are we? Well, we're the British Army's sole railway capability. We're based in Kyneton, and we are a team that's 50 soldiers strong, recruited from across the railway industry. And as you can see, here's an example of a number of the companies where our soldiers are primarily recruited from. The majority line share are actually borne by Network Rail, and as of 2021, we're directly sponsored by Network Rail with a memorandum of understanding who provide bulk materials to us for training purposes as well. So the Network Rail board actively support 507. Military railway engineering. What's the difference between normal civilian railway engineering and military railway engineering? And some people that work in a maintenance delivery unit will probably contest otherwise and actually say military engineering is more akin to maintenance. First of all, military railway engineers need to be able to operate in an austere operating environment. There'll be no life support infrastructure, operating from underneath canvas and delivering tasks day in, day out from that firm base. It will be in a hostile environment. There will be a high threat, be that aerial interdiction or fires or SF, special forces operating on that railway line. That team will also have to force protect and defend itself when it's operating on the railway. And they'll have to use Spartan resources and materials. So, for example, some of the British Army's deployments can be rather rapid. There isn't enough time for supply chain back in the UK base to catch up with some provision of railway materials. Hence, we will have to go and source materials in theatre, cannibalise siding roads to actually get materials. We'll use a lot of ad hoc solutions and expedients. And an example here is from an exercise from 5 years ago where we learned how to construct sleeper ramps to offload vehicles off of trains. Also, military railways are temporary and transitory in nature. They only last the duration of the war, apart from if it's a recovery operation post-conflict of where we're repairing the railway and returning it back to service on handover to the civilian authorities. And the other thing is that's unique to military railway engineers is the training and supervision of new starters. Whereas in Network Rail, it will take many months to go through the process to train a new starter, and I'd suggest that's the same for most labour suppliers. When you have a military capability, you train and instruct any new starts. So, for example, if you have a military construction force of 100 soldiers bolted onto 507, within the space of 5 days, those soldiers will be trained up to standards where they can operate safely on the railway network, carry out repairs, and be supervised by military railway engineers to do that job. One thing that is common to all railway engineers, not just the military, is that urgent need to get the network back into operation. And that is something we carry forward from our civilian trades into the military life, is that urgent necessity to get network running. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, 507 has its own specialist trade group. That is the military engineer plate layer. In effect, a military railway construction engineer that is capable of doing inspection, maintenance, repair and renewal. Here's the trade badge. It's actually one of the rarest trade badges in the British Army. There aren't that many holders. And there's actually 3 layers of the trade group. So intermediate plate layer is a starter. Advanced plate layer means you can supervise tasks, and then supervisor plate layer means you can coordinate renewal levels of activity. We run our own PTS scheme that comes under the MOD Railway Rulebook, so Sentinel doesn't apply for our qualification range, although those qualifications that are held on Sentinel can supplement our capability. And the photograph here indicates how MDA military engineer plate layer will work with an untrained labour force here. This is a supervisor from Paddington Permanent Way, who's a corporal in the team, supervising a team of labour, actually moving rail into place and doing the manual handling bit. Our training facilities are at Kyneton. We've been established there for a good 20 years now, and we have started to do significant betterment of our training estate. More about that later. And also the training that we offer is something completely different to what you'll find on the normal railway network. So we cater for derailments, damage repair, demolitions, bridging, and also force protection. And so it comes hand in glove with any of the railway skills you bring with you when you join the team, but also you'll be trained under these warfighting conditions to actually learn how to be a military engineer. Our history. Royal Engineers have been doing military railways as far back as 1876 with the Abyssinia campaign, which was the first use of a military railway at war that was actually built by the Royal Engineers. It was used in the Crimea prior to that, however, 1876 was the first application by the Royal Engineers. And from there on in, the wars of the 20th century, the Boer War, the First and Second War, became heavily dependent on the use of railway infrastructure and Royal Engineer railway troops to enable those wars to actually occur and be won. Great examples of temporary bridging on the Modder River in the Boer War, and the prolific use of railways on the Western Front, and indeed in Palestine and Mesopotamia, the use of railways was the most vital way to move equipment forward. On the other side, not a lot of people know that the Second World War heavily used railways, coming to the later stages as far as the Northwest Europe campaign, 1944 to 1945. The Royal Engineer Railways, along with the American US Army Transport Corps railways, followed the front line, so much so that the day that victory in Europe was declared, the Royal Engineers opened up the railway line straight over the River Rhine, known as Victory Bridge. If you are interested in this, the Institution of Civil Engineers has some excellent papers entitled The Civil Engineer at War, and you can research what happened there. And lastly, in our long history, was the events of 1965. Essentially, a very large Royal Engineer Railway service was divested. The operating side of the Corps was passed over to the Royal Corps of Transport, and what remained was a very small unit of infrastructure engineers known as a permanent way troop. In 1971, this was retitled as 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers. We can claim our history all the way back to 1876 in a continuous line. However, our forming up date was 1971. Some recent operations where railways have been vital and where Royal Engineers and our NATO colleagues have been involved was the 1999 Kosovo campaign. The left-hand picture shows repairs on the way to Pristina Airport, of which the Italian Railway Regiment, who we work closely with, carried out to repair bomb-damaged track. And on the right-hand side, Colonel Steve Cheetham, Royal Engineers, assessing a derailed K4 train after a mishap on how it's going to be recovered. More on Colonel Cheetham later. And our last deployment was Operation Telic in 2003 in Iraq. This campaign saw the mobilisation of 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers to form a military design authority. Its plate layers then plugged into 29 Armoured Engineer Squadron to form a composite railway team, and that team, after the invasion, restored the railway line from Basra to Qazar, returned it back to operating condition. And part of that engagement, as you see from the photographs, was engaging with the local railway workforce and getting them paid and back into the business again of being railway people, and also restoring some pretty poorly maintained infrastructure to actually carry traffic. So, stepping on to my journey and understanding where we've been going these past 4 years in increasing the capability of 507. So, in 2003, a post-operational tour report was produced on what was carried out in Iraq in terms of military railway engineering, and it made a number of recommendations. Step forward to 2018. I joined the team in that year as engineer specialist, and I observed exercise turnout 18. Exercise turnout is the team's annual training concentration, 2 weeks a year, and it goes away and it tackles a number of large renewals, repair tasks, and these could be on defence infrastructure, including areas like Mönchengladbach or any of the railways in the United Kingdom, or it could be on a heritage railway, or indeed with our colleagues over in Bologna in Italy with the Italian Railway Regiment. In 2018, we observed the construction of 200 feet of track on the LMMR railway in Wales, and also repairs to Mönchengladbach. And what I observed there was a significant amount of manual handling, and due to use of concrete sleepers, there was no production rates, and we were dealing in jointed track in that particular time. And a review of the doctrine the Royal Engineers were using was pretty obsolete. Some of it had been written in the 1940s, and some of the lessons learned from Operation Telic hadn't been put into action for want of equipment or an updated doctrine to take that into account. Logistics was very limited. Rail and materials were normally provided up front on the work site, and there was no planning to actually deliver that itself. And the big thing for us, and we actually see it in Network Rail to be honest, is infrastructure was divorced from railway operations. That vital wheel to rail interface was not there. So railway operators had been disbanded as a capability. The two railway squadrons, 7-9 and 275 squadron, were disbanded in 2014, and 507 STRE stood proud as the only railway unit, so an infrastructure capability without an operating capability. So that's what we saw, but there was good points. There was a very strong relationship with the Italian and Dutch Army railway engineers, and there was really high standards of artisanal skill within the military engineer plate layer fraternity. So they were capable of carrying out signalling and telecom, electrification of plant and track construction tasks with ease, with limited materials in a very austere environment. But something had to change. So first crank of the handle on a 3-year change programme was exercise turnout 19. Exercise turnout 19 was at Mönchengladbach, and the job was the replacement of 3 S&C to rebearer them and use the existing ironwork, and also to replace 100 metres of plain line of rotten sleepers and reinstate that. So we took the opportunity to use civilian equipment to see how we could transport it into theatre, and Quattro Plant Hire stepped in, and we were able to transport a 25-ton Doosan machine from the United Kingdom, road railer, and move it to Germany to assist us. And with that, we was able to test the capabilities of sleeper changing equipment, tamping banks, and also using an RRV in close proximity to our workforce to actually replace the ironwork on those 3 sets of S&C. The whole exercise, based using some base estimates from Network Rail Strategic Business Plan, actually generated about £1.5 million worth of savings to defence, with direct delivery by NATO railway troops, 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers, and a direct hire of a Quattro RRV. So good exercise, first step in the change hurdle, accessing supply chain, identifying allies in the railway supply chain, and also engaging with our 2 greatest NATO partners in railways, which was the Dutch 102 Company and Regimento Ferroviario, the Italian Railway Regiment, to actually come up with a good result. The next crank of the handle was exercise turnout 20. Taking on board the lessons of turnout 19, we decided we wanted to test the fourth generation of a much larger 507. And how would we do that? Well, looking at where we could get supplies of labour from within the army, we pulled in rail industry reservists using Network Rail's Yama Group for rail industry reservists, and we managed to attract a number of soldiers across. So those are soldiers not in 507, those are soldiers that could be working for Freightliner, in the local infantry regiment, or in the RAF reserve and working for Network Rail, and they've all got specialist skill sets. We also pulled in specialist attached arms such as combat engineers, logisticians, equipment repairers, and raw electrical mechanical engineers. And also we pulled in a vast labour force from infantry, cavalry and engineer regiments to actually form a composite team. And what did that actually look like? I'm sorry if this is a horrific slide for you, but we actually formed up a headquarters, a design troop, so we had our own internal design capability, 2 railway construction troops, a railway operating section, of which I'll come on to more, a small EOD section, and an engineering logistic troop. The idea behind this exercise was we would try and mimic the occupation of a railway line coming into theatre, and to do that we took over all 22 miles of the Wensleydale railway line up near Catterick in Yorkshire. Basing ourselves from Catterick Garrison, we were able to quarter and accommodate ourselves, which was no mean feat during COVID, when most places were off limits. And we set about working with the Wensleydale Railway to identify infrastructure tasks. And the ones presented to you on the map are the ways to the areas we chose. So Objective Kitchener was a bridge design task. Objective McMullen was the replacement of Wensley Level Crossing. Objective Everall was the relay of Harnby, which was a 500-yard plain line track location, and Objective Billington was the re-timbering of a 4-span bridge over the River Swale. So 20 miles of railway line operating under austere conditions. The only way to establish communications was forming a headquarters, which was actually contained within a train at Leyburn, and we ran the majority of our logistic operation from Leyburn and Redmire at Objective Kitchener. And to get communications, we set up the headquarters in a train, and we're communicating direct to site with Bowman radio to each of those respective locations. The logistics element, something we haven't practiced for a long time. Fortunately, Martin Frobisher became our saviour on this exercise. So he was able to lean in and supply Network Rail engineering trains for the benefit of the Royal Engineers, as Network Rail as a public body supporting the Army as a public body. This enabled us to get bulk recycled materials to site, which meant we could tackle large scale of renewal work. Also required was the recovery of 800 sleepers from Drax Power Station, basically digging up an old merry-go-round line and then refurbishing all those Arthur Dean clips with knackered threads and screws and returning them back to service. We're also able to test the compatibility of commercial off-the-shelf equipment such as Thomson Rail lifting beams with military plants in the discharge of 60-foot rails off the trains, and also use the military road transport network to move 800 sleepers, which took nearly 50 truck moves to achieve that. And the greatest feat of all was actually managed to fit out of gauge loads such as our D5 and 360 excavators onto well roll wagons and move them up the Wensleydale railway line to our work sites. Great capability. On top of that, bearing in mind the Royal Engineers got rid of the railway operating capability in 1965, we were able to form up a small railway operating section, and we ran our own engineering trains to give intimate support to the engineering work sites. And that included setting up a control. This military policeman here in the photograph is actually one of the route control managers from Three Bridges signal box, and also a number of my soldiers are drivers with Freightliner, and we're able to pull them together and start operating our own trains, which was good news. So Harnby was 500 metres of track relay using recycled Arthur Dean concrete sleepers. This was hard work, and the need for mechanisation, as you can see, was absolutely essential to move these sleepers about. Also, we were able to trial the use of thermit welding, which more on that later. But this was our first tentative steps of using a in-house 507 welder who works for Network Rail doing thermit welding and doing a lot of the connection work on the track. Wensley Crossing saw the replacement of a tarmacked crossing with rotten rails with a BOMAC panel system level crossing. A great learning curve for the team, doing some very solid infrastructure work, learning how to do mechanical lifting with beams and panels, and also reinstating the track. And there you can see one of our own trains moving across the completed level crossing at Wensley. The last of the main works was the Swale Bridge timber renewal. 4 spans over the River Swale. That photograph looks pretty calm, but actually that river's in flood. At the beginning of the exercise, the water was much lower, and the safety boat we had was capable of running in that river. And over the middle weekend of the exercise, Storm Alex struck, which meant the flood came through, and we had to suspend works, pull a Mark 6 assault boat out of deep stores in Bicester to actually have a safety boat that was man enough to deal with the task. Interesting things for us was you doing large boring of and augering of holes to take into account fixings for bridges. We normally use the Chambray sleeper drill range. However, we had to evolve novel ways of actually boring the holes out so we could get the connections in. And also the spot hire and use of Aquarius rails, road rail, Land Rovers were absolutely invaluable for logistics and replenishing that site as well. Last piece of the exercise was the design works, and we did some conceptual design work on the replacement of the bridge at Redmire, but also we worked on using the Maybe Compact 200 system and trying to imagine how that could be repurposed for rail. Now, it's quite commonly done in America with Acro Bridge. It's not been done with Maybe Compact 200 in the UK, so it was quite innovative work. Also, 530 specialist team Royal Engineers joined us, and they brought some of their soils testing equipment and coring equipment to understand a number of geotech failures along the Wensleydale Railway. So that was turnout 20. It was a completely drastic exercise, departure from what we'd done before. It was more realistic in terms of taking over railway, and it used a lot more logistics and it gave us a great handle on future planning on how we'd move that much material around in an operating theatre. And exercise 21, this year's exercise. So turnout 21 was based at Kyneton, and we wanted to focus it on betterment of our training facilities and improve plate layer trade training. Now, Kyneton did have a rail training layout. It was a £75 set of points that was installed on site. So working with DIO, we obtained a pair of right-hand £113 switches, S&C, and we installed a crossover junction. And then we threaded in plain line of £75 and £130 rail in to form a very large rail training area. And you'll see the advantage of that later. We mentioned Colonel Steve Cheetham. He was, until the exercise, the principal engineer for Defence Infrastructure Organisation for Rail, and was our de facto sponsor and mentor for the team. And during the exercise, he retired after a long career, and in honour of that, we named the junction after his name. So hopefully that gives satisfaction in future years. Young sappers will be toiling on that railway training lane, learning their military engineer craft on that S&C. And here's what we used it for. In week 2 of the exercise, we delivered a bomb damage repair event, and this had 3 large craters dug into it, derailed rolling stock thrown into the holes to replicate a stricken train. Was able to use Kuehne+Nagel's trains within the Kyneton depot to provide force protection and move our recovery equipment to site, and we was able to recover that large extent of damage within 12 hours, reinstating the line, reinstating the train, and getting it back to line speed. Also, within the training area, we established and evolved some of the bridging capability that we'd envisaged the year before. This involved construction of legato block concrete abutments, an ad hoc culvert using concrete sandbags, And all these techniques we're mentioning are contained within the Royal Engineer manuals and needed to be dusted off and validated on this exercise. So that's what we did. On one side, we constructed using MAT 75 propping a trestle pier, and from that we then built a rail cluster bridge. Now this design had been in service for nearly 100 years within the manuals, and again we dusted it off, recalibrated the sizing of the rail and the modern components, and actually tested to see whether it could be built safely, and we now own a short span rail cluster bridge at Kyneton as a result. The other innovation was the conversion of maybe Compact 200, or logistics support bridging as it's known within defence, to carry rail. This is an example of a top chord bridge. There is still some design work that needs to be completed on this, including extra transoms, but we can see the format, and already this was invaluable training, understanding the interaction between base plates and chord bolts, connecting that bridge together. Welding training was improved when we constructed 90 feet of concrete layout, and Sandwell Maintenance Delivery Unit was able to loan us some of their welding equipment. This meant in-house welder could actually teach soldiers how to do the business. And with some of our Italian colleagues, we worked out that network rail practice is completely different for thermit welding than the Italian railway practice. So it was quite interesting sharing the results of how to pack moulds and luting sand and timings for doing thermit welds. So it was good, valuable cross-pollination of techniques between the Italian Army and British Army. Also, re-railing training, the use of tangy and MFD re-railing jacks to re-rail wagons, and also use of crow's feet. Again, all part of the armoury of a military railway engineer, being able to get stricken traffic put back onto the road. But also, you know, it's not just about damage from enemy action. On railways, it's quite common to have low-speed derailments on poor condition infrastructure, and it's the kind of thing we should be expecting to do in theatre on poor condition areas. Also, we was able to liberate a few training aids. This is a World War II German Army Schienenwolf, or rail hook. Its entire role in life is to destroy railways. That hook is lowered and rips up the track. It was captured by the Royal Engineers in 1945 in Italy, and has been passed round to the Royal Corps of Transport in 1965, and then it found its way into the hands of the Royal Logistic Corps at Marchwood, where it sat rotting. So the team has recovered it. It's a National Army Museum asset, but it will be used as a training aid to understand how to do non-explosive demolition of railways or denial of railways in an efficient manner, and also the recovery of a small locomotive that will enable us to do re-railing training. That locomotive has a particular heritage behind it. Again, it was a Royal Engineer asset from the Second War, passed over. It became the mascot of the railway operations squadrons all the way through to the 2014 when they were disbanded. So it's come home to Kyneton. Pardon me. As already mentioned, we like to train with our international peers, as there are no peers within the British Army for us. So we train heavily with the Italian Railway Regiment and also the Dutch Army 102 Company. For this exercise, we're also joined by Spanish Army, 12 Engineer Regiment, and the German Army, who are looking to have a similar capability as 507. So the exercise was brilliant for spreading the gospel and doing networking between NATO nations and working out the interoperability. And funnily enough, the railway units are very interoperable. We use common tooling. There's only a certain amount of suppliers in Europe that manufacture railway tooling. That's common, and a lot of the techniques are common, apart from the only thing we constantly disagree about is which way fish plate bolts should stick out on the rail. And again, Network Rail support made this exercise happen. We have a memorandum of understanding where Network Rail gifts scrap to us every year that enables us to do training. Now, £30,000 doesn't sound a lot, but £30,000 worth of scrap from Network Rail equals 36 wagons on a train full of material, which is absolutely invaluable. You can see Major Martin Frobisher, Network Rail Board Director, and also a member of the Engineering Logistics Staff Corps, who is our de facto honorary colonel looking after us for that exercise. Also, we was able to work with our industry partners in GB Rail Freight, who run the MOD contract, and Kuehne Nagel, who run the facility, who provided intimate support with trains throughout the exercise. Another aspect of military railway engineering is the forming of austere railheads. An army needs to be able to just punch a hole in a fence line, use its mechanical handling equipment and discharge trains, and the exercise again proved that we could effect that rather rapidly with our equipment range. So that gives you an idea of our exercising and the transformation and line of development that we're going with military railway engineering in the British Army. Some of the stuff that's also been happening in the background. We did provide soldiers during Operation Rescript to support the initial efforts to sort COVID within the United Kingdom. Also, we did provide some small consulting element to Op Grummium, which was the reaction to the Beirut explosion, a quick infrastructure assessment of railway capability in theatre and advice and reach back to theatre, where 6.6 Works Group actually put soldiers on the ground to coordinate the British aid effort. And latterly, we did respond to the Stonehaven derailment. The Network Rail Board requested specialist recovery advice, and we mobilised a Royal Engineer and Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineer team to advise on the re-railing and recovery of one of the power cars from Stonehaven. That option wasn't taken up, and instead industry and capital delivery stepped in to lead the recovery. And while that's all been going on, we've also been advising the battle group in Estonia on Op Kabrit on certain engineering matters. The last ops-focused event in 2021, which just goes to highlight the success story 507 has been in building its profile and its capability, was Project Shamrock Tullamarre. The Army had an urgent need within Northern Ireland to establish a railway training facility so explosive ordnance disposal could do their training, because there was an uptick in suspect packages and devices in the province following Brexit tensions. We were able to mobilise a team within a 2-month time frame to carry out a full site survey, design, material resourcing, and then establish a 400-metre railway line with junction filled full of debris and materials that you'll find in any UK railway line, including cable runs, signalling systems, AWS, so that EOD could actually train in a safe environment out of cover of view from civilian population and effect and understand how to do search and EOD disposal in the railway environment. So I think that's a good success story illustrating the capability of the team. 10 soldiers working with the Antrim Sapper Squadron from 7-1 Engineer Regiment did this in 5 days and delivered a 400-metre stretch of railway in a very Spartan, barren area of Northern Ireland. So that is 507 Specialist Team Royal Engineers. As you can see, we have been on a long journey going all the way back to 1867 in developing military railway capability to support defence, and in recent years the modernisation of the team and building that capability so it can support the British Army for its future warfighting operations. If you want to find out more about us, follow us at the usual socials at 507 STRE. We're available on all good social media sites. And if you are interested in joining us, again, contact us on those social media sites or follow the email link below. And that is me complete. So I think we're going to do a Q&A now.
Thank you very much, Major Alex. That's fantastic. What an interesting area, and something that those of us that don't have any military experience, it's a whole world that you don't really think about, and how you would actually in situations like you describe actually be going out there and fixing and enabling the railway to help deliver or recover in countries where there's been warfare. Fascinating area. So encourage questions to be raised, please. If you raise them using the live event Q&A, and if you see a question you like, click on the thumbs up, and then we get an idea of which ones are of interest. I'm going to start off with one of my own, actually, if that's all right. It can be cheeky as moderator, but I'm just curious, how does the safety environment compare with working in the Network Rail environment? What's it like for procedures and paperwork?
So it's interesting, that one. It's quite novel, and I think Rupert Lown asked me this as well, and I gave it this way. So Network Rail is all about mass mobilisation of labour and having a core competency range to go and achieve something, and everything has to be credited, and then you get the COS competency or you get the ES competency and one delegated person to do it. There is no particular chain of command on a traditional engineering work site, I would hazard, because you've got the COS or the person in charge, you've got the ES, and then you've got the supervisor that's actually leading the work content. On military working, we use the MOD Railway Rulebook, the MOD PTS, which is a lot less prescriptive, and it's actually for the commander to dictate what the safe system of work looks like. And it all depends on what the threat is. So if you're working on an open line, adjacent line working, the threat is train movements. The commander on the ground, be that a sergeant, a corporal, a lieutenant or captain, will determine what the protection arrangements are, what the PPE arrangements are. You know, so for example, if we are working on a railway line where there's threat of direct rifle fire, you wouldn't want to wear high visibility clothing, but you would also want to maintain a lookout for a train movement that's coming through the work site. So it's about tempering to the threat that's in the field. And actually using the military chain of command means that you can actually grip people a lot better, and you can still use things like lookouts and controls of site safety and delegate that, but the overall respect towards rank makes it a lot easier to run a safe work site.
Fantastic. So I guess a degree of dynamic risk assessment to some extent.
Indeed, indeed.
To use a phrase. But yeah, that's fantastic. Very, very interesting. Okay, got a question from John Cartledge here. Forgive my ignorance, but what exactly is an austere railhead?
So, it's terminology we use within defence. An austere railhead is just taking a piece of railway line that hasn't got a loading or unloading facility. There's no metal track, there's no hard standing, and literally you are just punching a hole into the fence line or to the boundary line, coming in, and you are discharging whatever you are getting off the train, be that main battle tanks, using field expedients such as ramp wagons or side loading docks that you have to specially construct. And it's all about bringing that offloading rail capability. And I suggest the closest thing to an austere railhead is probably what happens on track renewals work sites, where you're bringing all your equipment material on the train, discharging it straight to site as the first phase of that possession block. So I think that's the closest thing. Otherwise, it's just about, you know, taking a piece of plain line track or a siding road in the middle of nowhere with no support function and discharging your train direct from that.
I see. No road access, no site setup, just...
Yeah, so often you will end up punching your own road in. A lot of the vehicles that we're discharging won't need roads, main battle tank, Challenger, etc. They're cross-country vehicles and they'll be straight off the train once you've discharged it.
Okay, I've got a question from Martin here. Does your team cover railway signalling systems?
Yes, so we do, and this is the joy of recruiting across the railway industry. Not only do we have permanent way trained soldiers, because that's the common currency that we're all working within military railways, is that the specialisms that everyone brings into the team. So I've got rolling stock engineers, I've got the TfL approvals engineers for on-track plant, I've got several signalling and telecom trained soldiers. One's a section manager in the midst of Western region, electrification and plant, and civil engineers as well within the team, and also operations staff such as signallers and drivers. So we've got a complete mix, and we are forming up the signalling and telecom capability. It's more about how you can in an operational environment, and I mean wartime operational, switch off that system safely when it's been damaged and put into place an expedient signalling system, for example.
Right, I see. So by virtue of the team you've got and the variety of locations they come from, you've got the variety of skills effectively.
Exactly, and it's worth noting, not only are each of the soldiers a military engineer plate layer, and they have their network rail or TFL competency group behind them, they're also trained combat engineers, so they're sappers like everyone else in the rest of the corps. So you could multitask them to do demolition of a bridge one day and railway construction the following day, or indeed signalling telecom tasks.
Wow, that's very versatile.
Yeah, so there's a bit of difference in terms of trade union orientated network rail, where you only stick with one trade group doing one thing, and 507 is quite refreshing.
I managed to like that, I'm sure. I've got a question from Tom here. You mentioned surveying the site in Operation Shamrock. How did you go about doing this, and how would you attempt to do this in live theatre? So
there's quite a few variations. Our basic fallback is theodolite work, EDM total stations and levelling systems, compiling it into a CAD drawing and working out basic level and gradient diagrams. We do have several designers in the team that explicitly work in plane line track design and S&C design. So we use their skill set to actually come up with what looks within tolerance to railway standards. And it was more about look on Shamrock Tullamurray, because it was about giving the feel of a railway constrained site. But when we, so Cheetham Junction built at Kyneton was surveyed and designed as a proper junction, for example, using DIO's Defence Infrastructure Railway Standards. What else can we use? Well, we've been working and utilising things such as point clouds for rapid survey of sites and use of drone survey as well. So there's all sorts of technology that can be applied. So there's lots of things on the market now. Anything that you're innovating with in network rail, we're probably looking at and applying. And things like very basic things as well, such as Amberg trolleys and whatnot, to get basic track geometry readings before and after renewals work sites as well.
Fantastic. Got a few questions. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Steve has asked how are alignments and track designs produced?
So again, that follows on. So again, do a survey of the existing track layouts that we're working on. We then place offsets in, and again we use our plane line or S&C designers to actually come up with an alignment and geometry going through. And we use the same tools that PWAL use on site for lining out your sighting boards. There's a lot less digitization in the tooling we use. So our D5s, for example, are the basic green D5 bulldozer. There is no laser profiling system on it. So everything's done the manual means. And the simple reason is, there's two actually. One is defence can't afford a significant amount of instrumentation. But secondly, that instrumentation's got to be calibrated, maintained. And when you're in theatre, you've got to rely on this equipment to work every single time. And it might not necessarily do that if it's being hauled in and out the back of a truck every time you want to deploy it. So getting used to using a dumpy level, tape measures, Hallard, basic survey techniques are absolutely core for all of our soldiers, and every soldier will understand the joys of doing Hallard curve measuring, for example. So they will get a dose of it.
That's good. So sort of back to basics a little bit then.
Exactly.
Excellent. So I've got a comment from Martin here. It'd be wonderful to have your teams back at Longmoor, Hampshire. Any chance of your team returning? There's still some material left from when the Royal Engineers were running their tracks there.
We'd love to have Longmoor back. So yeah, there is actually a 200-metre stub of railway line contained within the Fibula Urban Training Village, and that was built about 20 years ago by 507. So we have left our mark there, but I don't think the railways will be coming back to Longmoor soon. think that's an opportunity lost.
Okay, another comment here. Major General retired Mungo Melvin has said, as chairman of the Railway Engineers Historical Society, is that Railway Engineers or Royal Engineers? Apologies.
Royal Engineers.
Royal Engineers, showing my lack of knowledge there, and Corps historian. Just a comment to say how interesting and valuable I found this presentation. Would like to invite Major Hamilton to give a similar webinar to the REHS. And he asked you to get in touch with him, really. So a well done and a request there. I think you've got a follow-up talk you've been asked to give.
Will do, General. I'll get in comms later.
Fantastic. So just going to run down the questions, make sure I've not missed things. A question here from Martin. I may be too old nowadays. What's the age limit, please?
So the upper age limit, and I will confirm if you drop me an email via the recruiter's address, I think is 42, but I'll have to check that.
Okay, right, got quite a lot of questions actually, so let me keep on going, make sure I've not missed any. What proportion, Mike asks, what proportion of 507 specialist team are full-time and what proportion of time might be required from part-time personnel?
So none of 507 are full-time, they're all reservists. So yeah, our minimum commitment is 19 days a year. There's no drill nights, and we train 2 weeks a year on our annual training exercise with 5 special to arm training weekends per annum as well. So that's where we concentrate all our trade training. There are extra training opportunities that crop up. Certain government departments and bits of defence call us in quite frequently to do special jobs. And also there's normal military training, adventurous training, but the core commitment's 19 days to be declared a usable soldier. So yeah, it's there is no regular variant of us at the moment. It's all Army reservists.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here. How do you bring your military leadership skills into Network Rail? Do you find the two align? Do you bring mission command, etc., into Network Rail, which in a business can be quite layered?
So yeah, that's an interesting thing. I think my latest job as route infrastructure engineer and my time prior to that as infrastructure maintenance engineer at Romford Maintenance Delivery Unit was very much based off of the leadership skills of what I've picked up through my time in the Army, right the way through Sandhurst, Operation Herrick in Afghanistan, but also what Staff College does thinking process. And it was very much one of the core things. We can give advantage in incident management. So, for example, managing Romford MDU, it was quite common to deal with failed points, damaged crossing units, a lot of stakeholders involved, but the ultimate thing was about getting a cohort of trained people onto site rather rapidly and safely to carry out a repair. And it was more about the planning, it was more about the motivation, it was about the communications piece. And I think that's where the military training snaps in rather easily, keeping a level head while everything's going on, particularly when a second or third piece of rail goes at the same time and the network's in disarray, and keeping that all going together. So yeah, that's where it all comes in.
Yeah. I've got a question from Jake here. If you were to join with a civil engineering HND degree and Eng Tech status, would you have to join as an officer, or would you be able to join as a sapper?
It's your choice, ultimately, and my advice is I joined as a soldier, as an 18-year-old, and did several years as a private and learnt a trade. And my reflection back on why I did this and the advantage of it is I understood what other soldiers go through, so that when you are commanding, you can understand the mindset, where they're coming from, where needs improving in their leadership. So can you, if you've got a HND, doesn't automatically put you on the path to commissioning. I think it's also about a want to do it. Also, I've got directors that are holding the rank of sapper within the team. So, you know, they're fellows of the institution. They've got very busy day jobs running consultancies. They don't necessarily want to do the command piece when they're away with us, but they want to bring their skill set to play. And likewise, I've got people that are young thrusters coming up, commissioning and becoming junior officers. And again, they're not necessarily chartered or anything, but they're on that professional engineering line as well.
Okay, probably got about 3 or 4 more questions coming through. Sorry, we just lost you there for a moment. Are the comms working okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, it must have bounced out.
Might have been my end. So I've got a question from Daniel. As a recent civil engineering graduate looking to join the reserves, did you know that railways was the place for you when joining the Territorial Army?
No, I didn't. I was a naive 18-year-old, and I turned up to an open day and I saw all these trade groups in the Raw Logistic Corps. So I started.
Just starting to lose you on the audio there, Alex. I don't know if you want to maybe drop the video just to improve the broadcast.
So yeah, I turned up to an open day and I saw lots of trades on offer, and what attracted me to the railway team was their unique capabilities. It seemed highly skilled work and a good entrance into the railway industry. So that's why I joined over.
So forgive me, you joined the railway first and then the army, I assume, or was it the other way around?
No, so I was a student at Kingston University, and I joined the Territorial Army and went to the open day, chose my trade, and went, I want to be a railwayman. So, and Fantastic. Then ultimately it set me on a path to becoming a railway engineer. Fast forwarding to 2004 when I joined Network Rail.
That's very interesting, because I suppose how many of us got into the railway industry, we sometimes wonder, because a lot of people just in civil engineering, they don't always think of railways, or they didn't used to, as possible careers. And then, you know, surprised to find out there's quite a lot of civil engineering here. But yeah, that's amazing. That's wow. So a few more questions. John Cartledge asks, how easy is it to find and recruit all the various technical specialisms you need?
So it's easy enough to attract people to join the team. The problem that we're finding is getting them through the initial phases of the recruiting system that the Army has. So it can be quite long and drawn out with a lot of administration and getting through the medical process. But there's a significant amount of people that now know that we exist and putting their hand up to join, which is good news. But we always need a flow of volunteers coming in to keep ourselves filled with railway people.
I've got a question here on the technicalities of it. As a reserve, can you become part of a specialist engineering team?
Yes. So and I guess this is where 6.5 works groups comes to its own. So 6.5 recruit exclusively from those industries that their specialist team Royal Engineers come from. So, for example, the power team are all from the power industry. You've got nuclear scientists in that team. You've got people that know how to do a black start on a coal-fired power station, that kind of people. So, you know, there are specific heavy industries that we cater for in there. And if you are a generalist as an engineer, you're a conventional civil engineer and you flip between highways or public realm or whatever is your want, we've still got a place for you. If you've got an analytical mind, you're active of mind and body, you're capable of doing analysis, calculation, you hold some or lots of technical qualification, the Royal Engineers will be very happy to consider you.
Fantastic. Got a question from Jan Lee Chu asking, you mentioned you were deployed in Afghanistan. What was your experience there like?
It was a different kind of deployment. So I served with Commando Logistic Regiment, commanding a troop of 60 soldiers in Helmand. So it was something completely unparalleled to what I've done, never done before, I have to say. So I was a junior engineer at Network Rail, working in the Anglia Structures team, looking after bridges one week, and a week later, after a phone call from my commanding officer, I was doing beat-up training to go out the commandos and support the Commando Logistic Regiment in terms of replenishment of ammunition right into the middle of Helmand and the gun lines there. So it was completely different.
Wow.
But a great experience to understand what went on out there.
So not related to railways, just supporting the general logistics out there, was it?
Correct. Yeah. So a lot of my first 20 years of service was the first few years was railways. Then it went into transport when I commissioned, and then swapped over as I discovered 507, rebadged for the Royal Engineers, and have fully reintegrated my railway experience back into defence.
Yeah. I think we'll do 2 more questions and then probably wrap up, because we've had a good round of questions. So Michelle asks, it was brilliant to hear that NetRail board reached out to you after Stonehaven. Have they reached out to you to hear your ideas on how we might modernise maintenance or dealing with staff reductions from VSS?
No, they haven't. Although they'll probably get a pretty robust reply in terms of what the thoughts are, but that's probably coloured with my mind having been an IME delivery unit, to be honest.
I see crossover from both areas of your profession and life. Fantastic. I think we'll just finish then on one last comment, really, from Martin. Most organisations in the British Army are improving ongoing existing services, whereas it seems that your team had to completely rebuild something that was knocked down some years ago and ongoing. You're doing a great job. Well done. I hope you go through the promotions board with ease.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a nice comment to finish on. It's an area I knew nothing about and I know very little about, and it opens my mind a little bit, really, to think about stuff that I don't have to worry about in a completely civilian role. Remarkable, really, what you do, and also how you got into it, and then the railway industry. Yeah, I think a really thought-provoking talk. So thank you very much, Major Alex, for coming to us. I hope that's been of interest to our members. Fantastic area. I guess it's something we can all look out for. And you mentioned those RCEA papers as well, something the civil engineer at war. And who knew you had the term plate layer as an official designation as well? That's really good. So thank you very much for the talk. So on behalf of everyone here, I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.